In abandoned cities, under layers of hot sand, and in closed museum warehouses, researchers are discovering ancient remains whose DNA stubbornly refuses to fit into the conventional genetic tree. Today, we will look at tiny 6-inch skeletons from the Chilean desert, giant elongated skulls from Peru, fair-haired people from the Asian wastelands, and finds that for years were considered irrefutable proof of contact with other worlds. We and number 39, L, take you step by step, from wild guesses on the internet to rigorous laboratory tests. And in the end, you and number 39, L, find out which of these discoveries really rewrote the biology textbooks and opened a whole new branch in our own history. In 2003, historical artifact hunter Oscar Munoz walked through the ruins of the abandoned mining town of La Noria in the Chilean Atacama Desert. This place has been abandoned for a long time, leaving behind only dust and empty buildings, burned by the merciless sun. While rummaging around the local church, Munoz came across a white cloth bundle tied with a purple ribbon. Unfolding it, the searcher froze in amazement. Inside lay something that looked like a human, but its size was no larger than an ordinary pen, only 15 centimeters long. The skeleton seemed to be formed. It had hard, bony teeth and an elongated skull that was completely atypical for us, tapering towards the top. Furthermore, upon closer examination, it was discovered that this creature only had 10 pairs of ribs, while every healthy person should have 12. The find was so frightening and unusual that it was immediately sold to a private collection, and the photographs instantly spread around the world. The internet community immediately issued its verdict. People wrote en masse that such anatomy physically could not belong to an earthly being. 10 ribs, huge eye sockets, a strange domed skull, and microscopic dimensions fit perfectly into the image of a typical alien from Hollywood movies. There were even pseudo-documentaries whose authors seriously claimed that this was the pilot of a small spaceship that crashed in the desert many years ago. Conspiracy theorists demanded that governments reveal the truth, claiming that the creature and number 39's DNA would prove our extraterrestrial origins. The real solution, however, turned out to be much deeper and more tragic. Leading geneticists from Stanford University were able to extract biological material directly from the bone marrow of this tiny mummy. The results of the DNA analysis left no room for mysticism. The creature turned out to be a human, or rather a girl, whose ancestors lived in South America, not far from where it was found. But how can we explain its appearance? Computer analysis of the genome revealed more than 60 severe genetic mutations, many of which had never before been encountered in medical practice. These disorders affected the genes responsible for collagen formation and bone growth. Her bones aged and hardened dozens of times faster than normal. That, and number 39's, why the palm-sized skeleton looked like the remains of a 6-year-old child. The girl was born with severe deformities and most likely never even took her first breath. And if the tiny Atacama mummy is the result of a genetic error, our next stop takes us to a place where the shape of the skull was intentionally and significantly altered. Because in the sands of Peru, archaeologists have discovered something whose dimensions exceed human standards several times. In 1928, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello made a discovery that continues to puzzle independent researchers to this day. On the arid Paracas Peninsula, he excavated a vast necropolis hidden under layers of sand and stones. These underground chambers contained hundreds of perfectly preserved remains. But it wasn't in #39 the quality of the ancient fabrics that captured the world in number 39's attention. It was the shape of these peoples in number 39's heads. The skulls were incredibly elongated, stretched backwards to such an extent that their volume visually appeared about 25% larger than that of a modern human. The weight of some specimens also exceeded the norm by almost half. Scientists could not believe their eyes because the standard anatomical rules seemed to cease to apply here. Moreover, in some skulls, researchers did not find the sagittal suture, the line that connects the bones at the top of the human skull. As soon as the photos of these giant heads appeared on the internet, supporters of alternative history declared a sensation. They claimed that these were not people at all, but an ancient race of rulers who had arrived from another planet. The lack of a cranial suture and the enormous volume of the skull were presented as evidence for a different evolutionary path. These claims were soon joined by dubious genetic tests that claimed that the mitochondrial DNA of the finds contained mutations not found in humans or primates. But when professional anthropologists with modern equipment began research, the truth became clear. What appeared to be alien anatomy was actually the result of an ancient cultural practice. The Paracas people deliberately deformed the skulls of their babies by binding them with bandages or placing them between wooden planks while the bones were still soft. This practice served as a sign of high social status. The greater volume and weight of the skulls turned out to be an optical illusion, as well as the result of thickening of the bone tissue due to constant pressure. The disappearance of the sagittal suture also received a logical explanation. With severe deformation, the bones can fuse completely. A large-scale DNA analysis conducted a few years ago confirmed that the genome was fully human and typical of the indigenous population of the Americas. Artificial deformation explains the strange shape of the skulls in Peru. But what happens when a similar and mismatch is discovered in the heart of an Asian desert, thousands of miles from its supposed origin? The next DNA mystery forced scientists to rethink the entire history of ancient migrations. In the heart of Asia lies the Taklamakan Desert, a place that locals say you can enter but not leave. The climate here is so harsh that it dries organic matter faster than an industrial oven. It was in these lifeless sands that archaeologists discovered something that completely changed our understanding of the ancient world. A few meters underground, they found overturned wooden boats, and beneath them, perfectly preserved human bodies. These people were completely out of place in the Asian landscape. The bodies were so well preserved that even their eyelashes were visible. The most famous find, called the Beauty of Zhaohe, had fair hair, a high nose, and distinctly European features. The people were dressed in woolen cloaks made using ancient techniques, and pieces of cheese were found next to them, probably food for the afterlife. Finding blonde people in boats in the middle of the desert was a real shock. Historians immediately began to search for an explanation. The main theory was that these were lost Europeans, Celts, or even Vikings who had made an unimaginable journey across the continent. The mummies became an argument for those who believed that the migration story was completely wrong. But in 2021, an international team of geneticists extracted DNA from these mummies, and the results changed everything. These people did not come from Europe. They turned out to be descendants of ancient northern Eurasians, an extinct population that survived precisely thanks to the isolation of the desert. Their fair hair and European features were not the result of migration, but an ancient genetic imprint preserved over time. The desert has preserved a genome that would otherwise be lost forever. But what happens when such an anomaly is discovered not in the sands, but in a dark mine? The next find not only looked strange, but also violated all known rules of human anatomy. In 1930, an American tourist was exploring an abandoned copper mine in northern Mexico. Deep in the tunnels, he discovered a niche containing a human skeleton, and next to it, a skull resembling a science fiction object. The skull was small, but its back was greatly expanded, resembling an inverted pear. The bone appeared thin but extremely strong. Sinus cavities were absent, and the eye sockets were small and unusually low set. Decades later, this artifact fell into the hands of researcher Lloyd Pye, who gave it the sonorous name and, quote, "Star Boy," end quote. He begins transporting the skull around the world, gathering packed halls of people eager to see real evidence that we are not alone in the universe. The "Star Boy project" is becoming a true internet phenomenon. Conspiracy theorists claim that this is direct evidence of interbreeding between humans and aliens. According to legend, the mother was an ordinary earthly woman, and the father came from the stars. As evidence, strange red fibers were allegedly found inside the bone itself, which do not lend themselves to earthly classification. Lloyd Pye has been collecting donations online for years, claiming that academic science is afraid to study this skull for fear of destroying the familiar picture of evolution. People believed that the tests would reveal an alien code. As technology advanced, independent laboratories finally conducted full DNA sequencing. The results are banal and disappointing. The genome shows that both the mother and father are ordinary people of Native American origin. There are no traces of extraterrestrial life. But what about the unusual head shape? Doctors quickly diagnosed him with congenital hydrocephalus. This is a condition in which cerebrospinal fluid builds up in the skull. In infants, the bones are still soft, so the pressure expands the skull from the inside like a balloon. This explains both the enormous volume and the location of the eye sockets. As for the mysterious red fibers, they turn out to be remnants of ordinary sealant and varnish with which the skull was treated to preserve it. The, "Star Boy" turned out to be a medical case, not a message from space. But the next genetic mystery awaited researchers not underground, but on Paradise Islands. Imagine a tribe living on volcanic islands off Africa, but looking like they stepped off a Viking ship. When Spanish ships anchored off the Canary Islands in the Middle Ages, sailors expected to encounter typical African tribes. But instead, tall people with fair skin appeared before them, many of them with blue or gray eyes. This tribe was called the Guanches. They lived in volcanic caves, had no boats, and communicated with each other through a whistle that could be heard for miles. But the most amazing thing was something else. In sacred caves, the Guanches carefully preserved the bodies of their ancestors, dried, treated with resin, and wrapped in goat skins. They mastered a complex mummification technique that was strikingly reminiscent of that of ancient Egypt. Alternative history enthusiasts immediately created theories. One of them claimed that the Guanches were surviving inhabitants of Atlantis. Another, that they are a lost Celtic people. A third, that the islands were a secret colony of the ancient Egyptians. But DNA analysis put an end to the speculation. Geneticists discovered that the Guanches were directly related to the Berbers, a people from North Africa. Centuries ago, a small group of them settled on the islands and over time lost their seafaring skills. Thus, they remained isolated. Light skin and eyes are explained by the so-called bottleneck effect. When a small population reproduces in isolation, rare genetic traits become widespread. Science is busting the myths again, but the real storm has only recently erupted. Not in ancient caves, but in a parliament chamber. In 2020, strange bodies were presented to the Mexican Congress. Wooden boxes were opened in front of politicians and journalists. Inside lay small white creatures with elongated heads and 3 long fingers. They looked just like the aliens from the movies. Ufologists confirmed that they were over 1,000 years old. X-rays were shown with metal plates in the bones. There was talk of unknown DNA. The internet exploded. But scientists quickly discovered the truth. These were fakes. The bodies were assembled from human and animal bones. The heads were manipulated. The hands were artificially created. The coating was ordinary soil used to cover up adhesives. And the unknown DNA is just contamination. It turned out that everything was done for sensation and profit. But while the world was discussing the hoax, something real was happening in Siberia. In 2008, archaeologists discovered a small piece of bone in Denisova Cave. It was part of a child and number 39's finger. Initially, scientists assumed it belonged to a human or Neanderthal. But DNA analysis revealed something unprecedented. The genome did not match any known human species. A new species was discovered, Denisovans. They lived alongside our ancestors. They interbred with them, and part of their genome still exists today. For example, the Tibetans and number 39 ability to live at high altitudes is a legacy from them. This small bone proved that several intelligent human species once existed on Earth simultaneously. We and number 39 have come a long way. We and number 39 have seen the tragic story of the Atacama girl. We and number 39 have shattered the myths of Paracas. We found ancient Eurasians in the desert. We exposed forgeries. And we made a real scientific discovery. Whenever we encounter something strange, we think of aliens. But the truth is often much more incredible. Our own planet hides stories more impressive than any fiction. Maybe we shouldn't hash 39. Sometimes it's enough to look at the ground beneath our feet, or into the microscope. Because the greatest secrets of the universe may have always been inside us. The world is much more interesting than we imagined. See you in the next videos.